Good afternoon. Dear listeners, welcome to AUGA Group meeting with investors. I'm Emilia from Nasdaq Vilnius and I'll be moderating today's event. We will start with a presentation from the management, which will be followed by the Q&A session. Please be informed that this webinar is being recorded. As always, I encourage every one of you to ask questions during or after the presentation in the Q&A section. If you want to ask the question anonymously, please select Anonymous Attendee box before submitting. With that said, I am pleased to introduce today's presenter, Chief Financial Officer Mindaugas Ambrasas. Mr. Ambrasas, please, the floor is yours and good luck.
Thank you and good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to the presentation. As always, thank you for your time. As Emilia already introduced, my name is Mindaugas. I am CFO of AUGA Group, and I try to tell you a little bit more how AUGA Group is doing in 2022. So I think we can start, and in the beginning, I should say that I'm feeling much better doing this presentation today than I was feeling for the last three presentations, because it's not a big secret. The company had quite a tough year last year. And it's always difficult or tough to be a person which gives those bad messages. So from this introduction, I think you also understand that we are much more optimistic about our results this year. And if we move to the slide and to overall financial figures for the first quarter, you can see maybe why. Of course, sales of the group decreased by almost 10% and now are 17.5 million euros for the first quarter. But it's really mainly affected by our poor year last year, because due to lower harvest, so generally we had less stock to sell for 2022, but the result of poor harvest was already booked in 2021, and now we just left with technical sales operations. But if we talk about our gross profit, EBITDA, so here we already see results from our activities in 2022, or the harvest we are planning to harvest in 2022. And here you can see, I would say, nice rebound from really poor results last year, as our gross profit increased by 25% and reached 5.76 million euros. EBITDA also increased by almost 1 million euros and 6.7 million euros. This, I would say, the biggest impact in this positive development comes from our agricultural business, crop growing segment, where significant increase in commodity prices really has a positive effect on our value of planned harvest and financial results as well. But as you can also see from the slide, we also understand that, first of all, agricultural business has lots of uncertainties, and the weather is the most important one, because even last year we also had the situation when we were quite optimistic about our harvest potential in May, but June and July completely changed the story. Additionally, this year, I would say we have even more uncertainties. Everyone knows about all those things which are happening in Ukraine, changes in prices, quite significant increase in costs, of course, also has an impact, and we have to follow this. But as always, I would suggest to go through segment by segment and to discuss or to tell you more about latest developments in every segment to have better understanding what is happening. And as always, let's start with crop growing, our largest segment, and I would say most important segment, which still is responsible for biggest part of our results. So, if the segment is successful, so usually we have quite a good year. And unfortunately opposite, if we have very poor harvest as we had last year, so it also has a significant effect on overall group results. In the beginning of the year, if we talk about crop growing, so we usually have to talk about assumptions more. How we see our crops are looking, what is like the price level for future harvest, etc. So if we start from the first factor, what is condition of the crops, I would say that we are quite happy with condition of the crops for today, because all the things we had to do, sowing in autumn was done as planned, and the weather conditions were really suitable for that. Winter went really well. As you can see from the slide, only 4% of winter crop area we had to resow, which is like normal process, but this percentage is really on the lower end if we compare annual results in previous seasons. So winter really went through quite well for the crops, and all the spring work, sowing, other things we had to do with the crops also went according to plan. So generally, all the things we had to do, we completed in time. In overall, as I said in the very beginning, conditions of crops is really good. Another thing which maybe is a little bit different from the last year, due to changes in crop rotation, our feeding plan, this year we have a situation when I would say we have larger proportion so-called less risky cultures. Because if you remember, last year legumes were the cultures which really affected us most and where we suffered most, because these are the cultures which could give you either very good yields, and you could have very good financial results, but also this fluctuation of results is very, very big. And if weather conditions were like we had last year, the yields could go by 60%. So as you can see from the information, this year, due to those things I mentioned before, we have a situation when so-called less risky cultures, they account for bigger proportion of the crops. So this is yet another argument for optimism from yields perspective and the future harvest perspective. Another important factor, of course, are prices. And here I would say we have very positive developments. I don't think we need to go into details, because I think everyone knows that commodity prices, they risen very sharply for almost all agricultural commodities. And if we go to our statistics, because we don't have market price for organic commodities, we have and we see a very similar trend in prices. So then this increase of prices started in the end of last year. So the trend continues. And if we compare the prices we are having today with the prices which were a year ago, so we have very, very substantial increase. Of course, I have to say that, and I have to mention that the prices you see on the slide is for existing harvest. So generally, in Germany, you could get like 550 euros per ton for organic wheat if you're selling right now. Future contracts, they have slightly lower prices, but still comparing to the levels of prices we were having last year, the growth is really substantial. This quite a big change in the market, I would say, created some confusion and how it affected the market. So generally, we had a situation that due to very rapid and very significant growth of prices, market participants, they were somehow confused and were not like willing and waiting before making a contract for new harvest. So that's why we always said that we have a plan to contract 30–40% of our forecasted harvest by the end of Q2, and this process usually was starting in March. So this year, this process was somehow postponed and delayed. It's already in progress, and I would say that this was also quite beneficial for us because this trend of growing prices continued. So as we postpone making new contracts for future harvest, so we're in position that now we are making future contracts for the harvest in autumn this year with higher prices, which generally risen in the last month or so. If to be more specific on the situation and how the contract situation is for AUGA Group, as for yesterday, we had contracted almost 40% of forecasted harvest for 2022. But if you remember from our previous presentations, generally we could divide our harvest into two categories. Smaller part, almost 20%, is grown where we have long-term agreements in place. So generally we are growing some specific cultures and having long-term cooperation with different pricing. So if to exclude such contracts, and take into account this normal harvest we are trading every year. So at this point of time, 90% of such forecasted harvest is contracted. So I would say that we are still working on some additional contracts just to be in the position where we would like to be in order to mitigate some risks in terms of sales, but also will be on the safer side that we would be able to fulfill our contract obligations if something happens with the yields. But most important thing, as I said, growing prices, they also created a really good environment for us in terms of contracts we're making. So as you can see, all those contracts we already did, in average selling prices higher by 51% comparing to the prices we were selling our commodities last year. And this is excluding those long-term agreements. So with them, of course, this will be a little bit lower. But this is like potential. And what is also important to say that as we are discussing results for the first quarter, we in valuation, we were using prices which were actual for that period of time. And as this trend continues, so this also leave additional upside for the future valuation of the harvest for the second quarter and so on. And if we move to financial results, as I said, in the very beginning of the year, of course, the biggest effect comes from revaluation of crops. And when we did revaluation, we really had to look into those factors which affects our future harvest. So first of all, if we talk about forecasted yields, as condition of crops is good, so we didn't make any changes from the forecasts and plans we had in the very beginning of the year. If we talk about the prices, so of course, this increase of prices has positive changes. And as I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, we believe there is still room for improvement because current valuation in Q1 results is really reflects the situation in the beginning of April. And this increase of prices continued, and the contracts we made with the higher prices than they were in the beginning of April. So at the end of the day, we have 3.5 million euros profit from gain of revaluation of biological assets, and is a substantial increase from the situation we had last year. If we talk about our sales activities and results from them, as I mentioned at the very beginning, so generally what we are doing right now, we are just fulfilling the contracts and selling remaining stock from the last year harvest, because absolute majority of the harvest from last year is fully contracted. So we are just following agreements and selling by the orders from the customer. So this is the reason why the sales decreased. And the last important note, we already mentioned this during our presentation of annual results. We made some changes in internal pricing. So generally the aim was to really have very clear situation and have possibility to evaluate how every segment is doing. And as our crop growing segment really grows and sells forage to our dairy segment, so we wanted to make clear rules and have better understanding how every segment is doing. So the fixed price of those internal transactions was introduced. And generally, this quarter, you can see that crop growing segment had 0.7 million euros loss from such transactions, meaning that forage, which was used in milk production or in dairy segment, so generally the costs were higher than it's set in our internal pricing. And this can be explained that currently we are using forage from last year, and last year due to weather costs of the forage, because the yields were lower, costs were generally on a similar level. So they were higher comparing to our forecast, to historical averages, or how we would see this price to go. In the future, we would expect this result to be significantly lower, or even in some cases positive. But as a result of poor harvest last year, we have this result in crop growing this year. If we had subsidies where we didn't have any changes comparing to the situation of last year, so overall from crop growing activities in the first quarter, we have almost 5 million euros gross profit, which is substantially higher than the result we accounted last year. And as I said, the main driver is really still good quality of crops, and most importantly, very significant increase in prices. And part of that prices, it's not only like our projection, but part of that is already contracted. Dairy, I would say it's the easiest segment for me to cover today because in small steps, but everything is progressing, I would say. If you look at the graphs on the screen, you can see that if we talk about milk yields, we have 4% growth year on year. And this is really a good result for us because it's difficult to expect very significant growth there. So generally, I would say we would prefer to have small but constant steps in improvement. And if we talk about selling prices, so here we have a similar situation to crop market, because prices for raw milk are also increasing substantially. And if you can see from the graph, so generally average milk price increased by almost 16% in 2022. And this leads, I would say, to nice improvement in financial results as the sales has increased due to bigger production, higher selling prices. So it also led to better overall result, and we earned gross profit of almost 600,000 euros comparing to 200,000 euros last year. Another important milestone We were always talking that we want to increase our herd and had this 3.6 thousand as a magic number we would like to achieve. So yeah, we're still missing 9 cows, but I'm somehow sure that this will be reached. So generally, we are operating in full capacities in terms of production in dairy business. So I would say that right now the main focus is really to continue the progress, and also cost control is also important, because of course all the segments feel effect from increasing energy costs, fuel. Though this is not that big subject in dairy segment. Mushroom, unfortunately, the story is a little bit different when we talk about mushroom growing, because this is the segment which really faced various challenges in the last couple of years. If you remember, last year we had quite big challenges in production due to COVID, due to some technological issues. Then our production dropped significantly, and as the costs in the business are almost, or in the segment, are almost fixed, so generally this also dragged down results of the segment. So this year, I would say we still have some remaining problems with production, because if you can see from the graph, production in Q1 was higher than in the last quarter of 2021, but we are still lacking behind production a year ago. So, though we still have this constant improvement, but we still can't reach this maximum capacity and to get the best result from our production volumes. But secondly, and even more importantly, for the first quarter of 2022, mushroom growing segment was the segment which was affected most by increase of costs, because this is the segment which has quite low margins, I could say, and energy and payroll accounts for almost 35% of total costs. And these were, I would say, two of the cost lines which really had substantial increase. And this unfortunately led to poor financial results. And as always in FMCG market or in retail market, when you have pressure on your costs, you're always trying to change your selling prices. But I think it's in all the market, the situation is very similar. That it takes time and it's not easy to do. Because we started reviewing our prices in the end of last year. First changes were done in Lithuanian market, then we were discussing Baltics, we are discussing Scandinavian markets. So generally, even for the first quarter, we have, in average, if we compare the same products, an increase of prices by around 5%. But if we look at overall figure and average sales figure, you will see from the next slide or from the next table that in average we have almost the same selling price for Q1 comparing to the last quarter, just because of a different product mix. But still, even growth of selling prices by 5% is lower from what we experience in growth of costs. So of course we will have to continue this process, and last negotiations we will have effect on financial results in the second quarter of the year only. So moving to financial results, as I already mentioned, due to not full utilization of production and especially of growing costs, unfortunately, for the first quarter, we have even gross loss from the mushroom segment. And of course, now we are focusing a lot what to do and what to change in the nearest perspective. So I would say key focus areas are, first of all, is production. So figures for first 2 months of the second quarter are promising. Every month, we have more than 2,000 tons per 2 months. So getting back to the previous slide, you can see, it would be better result than in the first quarter and in line with the production we had last year. Secondly, as already mentioned, we are continuing negotiations regarding prices for the retail, and as I said, the latest agreements we have, results from them will be seen in Q2 only. And the third major task for the segment is really energy consumption control, because we are using gas, we are using electricity, for heat, for coal, production of coal, etc. So we are working on different solutions how to decrease consumption, and then we have some wins in there, but still it's lots of things must be done if we want to, and then we have to improve result and reach and being on the level we were in the segment before. FMCG. I would say after 3-4 years of constant growth, we are in the situation when growth of sales has stalled, and it's generally on the same level what we had for the first quarter last year. And the reason for that is mainly seasonality of sales. We already talked about this in our previous presentations, but for the last couple of years, we see a clear trend that customers from distance markets, US, for example, we really tend to order in huge quantities once a couple times per year. So even when we did our plans for this year, we really didn't plan growth of sales in the first quarter, and planned the growth in second and third quarters mainly. Now with the last negotiations, and we believe that majority of that should come in the third quarter. But for the first quarter, we have generally the same result from FMCG business as we had a year ago. And just as an overview, here you can see how and what are the biggest contributors of EBITDA, and where the biggest changes came from. So I think from the positive side that we really see nice developments in crop growing, in dairy, even FMCG with similar sales and cost pressure, EBITDA is slightly higher. But of course, the biggest challenges are in mushroom segment. But overall, EBITDA had increased by almost 1 million euros for the first quarter. Another important things to mention, because and we also did our annual presentation, we also said about our plans for this year, that of course, getting back to normal financial results and being more successful in our overall, our today's business is very important, and this is really a big focus for the company. But we also see 2022 as very important year for us in terms of our new technologies and development of new technologies, and maybe as a commercialization of new technologies. So as it was presented, that we had the plan and we secured the funding to implement at least some of the projects, to have some prototypes, to have part of our activities operating and using those new technologies. So just wanted to do an update what we are doing with those three key projects for AUGA Group. So if we talk about our biomethane infrastructure, it was planned in the beginning of the year that we will operate 3 facilities by the end of the year. So generally, we already started construction and installation works for the facilities. The aim is to finish construction and installation works, as it was mentioned, by the end of the year. Of course, situation with suppliers, logistic, etc., put some pressure on time frame, but still the projects are going are implemented as planned. If we talk about second project, specialized feed technology, so it was stated in the beginning of the year. We have this first prototype, and we are testing and working on the technology. So this is really the situation for today as well. We are still doing tests. We are still working on some other developments, changes in the technology, and then we will have results of the tests, and then we can make a decision. So then we will have this next decision to make how we want to scale that. And AUGA Tractor, the aim was to start small production, and then we had the announcement recently that this preparation for production of the first batch, small first batch, but it's already started. So the first orders for some parts is already done, and we are working on first steps in production. So generally, we, I would say, quite optimistic about outlook from financial perspective. Though, once again, there are some risks involved with that, but we're also moving forward with our technological developments. That's also, I would say, important and good news for AUGA Group. And as always, information about our share performance, I think it also corresponds the market. As always, there are links where you can find more information, financial figures in Excel format, etc. Legal disclaimers. And now I think I'm open for your questions and discussions.
Thank you very much for a comprehensive presentation. And indeed, we will proceed with the questions. But before that, I would like to remind all the attendees that you can send in your questions in the Q&A box of your screen. So let's start. And the first question would be as following: how the Q2 results could look for crop segment considering low yields? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. It's really difficult to go into speculations what could happen if we doing evaluation of crops every month, and as I said, the current situation with crops gives optimism and is really good. So we are quite positive about the forecast. But of course, we need to evaluate and look what could happen in the worst case scenario. So of course, if on the worst case scenario, we would have very similar situation to when we had last year, when the decrease in yields was substantial. I still believe we could be in difficult, but in better situation, just because of substantial changes in prices. Because if we have approximately 30 million euros of harvest value per year, so if you have 30–40% increase in prices, so this is your potential for additional or increase in sales. Of course, we have cost increase, etc. But we are we would be in different situation than we were in 2021. So it's very difficult to answer the question, because for the start, we still believe in normal yields this year, but I think we are better prepared or maybe environment is better for us if worst case scenario happens.
Thank you. Could you please comment on how soaring energy, transportation, and increasing salary costs will impact segment profitability separately by segments? Thank you.
Thank you. We are not disclosing specific figure segment by segment, but I think we discussed briefly about impact of increasing costs when we discussed every segment. But just maybe to conclude, mushroom segment is really affected most, and we also stated in the presentation that energy and employees they account for almost 36% of the costs. So of course, increases is very painful for us, and as you can see from the results, this was the main reason why segment is not profitable for the quarter. Effect on FMCG, we had some effect on FMCG, but I would say it's not that substantial. And if we talk about agricultural business, dairy or crop growing, of course, crop cost growth is there. We expected higher than historical growth of costs in the beginning of the year, but now we can say that, of course, actual figures exceed our forecast. But still, we talk about much lower level of increase in costs if we compare with increase of prices of the commodities. So, as long as we have prices, we can really still benefit from all the situation. In the FMCG and mushroom segments, it usually takes time when you can transfer this increase of costs to the prices of your product. So we are working on that, but for time being, of course, the impact is negative.
Thank you for your answer. Another question would be, approximately 40% of debt is with floating interest rate, and with increasing EU central bank rates later this year, how much impact that could leave on profitability and liquidity in companies' expectations? Thank you.
As it rightly stated, big part of our financing is the floating interest rate, and of course, this will have a negative effect on our funding costs. It's just, the question: what are our expectations? How high the interest could go? Because I would say from our liabilities from our financial liabilities, it's even more than 40%, but around 40 million euros are the loans with floating interest. So generally, everyone can make a calculation based on the assumptions on growth of interest rate, how this could affect our financial costs. But overall, it's still not that significant factor to discuss liquidity of the company. Of course, this will be yet another increasing cost, and this, of course, will have a negative effect on our profitability. But this is not the object to put the question overall liquidity of the company in place.
Thank you for your answer. Isn't it somewhat a red flag that leading agricultural tractor manufacturers are not really interested in AUGA M1 technology? Thank you.
Very interesting question. It would be very interesting to have a longer discussion with the person who asked this, because it seems that he knows more than I do, or maybe he's very well informed what is happening in the company. Because as a listed company, we have some limitations what and what we can't disclose. So, we have different discussions with different parties, but if we will have something to announce, of course, this will be done as required. But I think general comment regarding this technology and commercialization of technology is that, first of all, and we stated this from very beginning, we are not aiming to become yet another tractor producer and sell tractors. We are working to create completely new way how agriculture is done, and we are working on a way to create solutions how it is done. And tractor is only one part of this puzzle. So hopefully this answered the question.
Thank you for your answer. Could you please comment on software possibilities that AUGA M1 will have, for instance, precision agriculture technology?
There are lots of technological solutions which could be used, which are already created. So you don't need to develop something new. You just need to find a way to how to use them in your technologies. And of course, we are looking in lots of them. But priority for today is really to work on those three key technologies we are currently developing, on those three areas we are currently developing. And that's where our main resources, absolute majority of resources are used for time being. Because these are the most important for us for our future plans. These are the most important for us for all the things we had planned. So, and I think, those software solutions mentioned in the question, of course, they are important and they will be in much more detailed discussion in our R&D department. But generally now resources are focused in those key areas, which are, I would say, more important for us to develop right now. So, this is more for the future, and now we are focusing on core things.
Thank you. How much of forecasted harvest has already been booked, and what is the difference in pricing with last year?
We are not disclose specific figures, but to calculate which specific proportion of harvest is booked, this is not like subject to judgment by someone. We have methodology we are using, which is approved, which is reviewed in our audit committee, which is reviewed by our auditors. So generally, it's more like a mathematical formula in place. Then you put, your yields, prices, costs, and yet you have to calculate when the specific culture was sown, when the specific culture will be harvested, and what is time frame from one point to another. So this is like the proportion we are booking in our financial results. So of course, for the first quarter is really the minor part, because summer crops are not calculated yet, because they will be sowed only end of March, beginning of April. So this result we are showing for first quarter, this relates to winter crops only.
Thank you for your answer. When you say you are optimistic in terms of financial perspective, considering the new green projects, what does it mean for cash flow and future new earnings this year and in 2023? Thank you.
I think, okay, maybe I used this term optimistic too often in the presentation, but this is a side effect from really difficult years or results last year. But I think what I wanted to say that we believe and we hope that conditions we are currently and price level we are currently and we are making first contracts on this level. they give us belief that financial results for this year, for this season of harvest, should be substantially better than we had last year. I just can't find the question to remember the second part of the question. Okay, sorry. And regarding green projects, if you're having in mind those technological projects we are developing, so I think optimism comes that we were working on those ideas and those technologies for 2-3 years already. So we have this trust that we can find the solution and to become a producer of agricultural goods with neutral CO2 emissions. So if we are successful with the project, via projects we are currently implementing, so generally this will be really proof of our concept. So really the proof of projects we were doing for the last, as I said, 2-3 years, that they really work, that technologies we were creating, they really work. And then we will be in position when we can, start new discussions, how we can expand this technology within AUGA Group, how we can expand the usage of this technology for the third parties. But then we will be in a situation when we can show working concept, but not only ideas that we have in our heads and we believe that this works. We will have actually working prototypes. And of course, if we go into details about all those projects, it's not only about some changes, CO2 emission decrease, etc. There is also financial incentive behind all of them. Because, for example, if you talk about the tractor, so changing fossil fuel with their current price level to biogas, it makes financial sense to do that. If we talk about grass processing plant, we already mentioned that we are working on technology, and we aim not only to reduce CO2 emissions, but also increase our milk yields. So then if we will have all those prototypes working and showing financial results, so of course it will be much easier to discuss various possibilities to introduce this technology, as I said, either in AUGA Group fully or for the third parties as well.
Thank you very much for your answer. Could you please comment if currently the wheat price increase is well exceeding the cost increase? And the same question would be in terms of the dairy segment. Thank you.
If to give you a short answer, yes. So generally, if to look at just percentage-wise increase of costs and increase in prices, so increases prices is higher than the costs, preliminary costs we're having right now. Because with agriculture, we have this challenge that you will have your final costs of all agricultural process in the autumn only. But from what we see for today, the increase in prices is substantially higher.
Thank you for your answer. So how much negotiation power does AUGA has to negotiate mushroom sales price? Thank you.
Very good question. Unfortunately, I don't have very good answer to that. I would like to believe that we have some power at least, but looking into financial results and increase of prices, I have to admit that it seems either we are not doing a good job or we don't have this power. But though we are, on serious note, though we are really big producer in our region, but we have competitors, so of course it's difficult and challenging.
Thank you. Let's proceed to the next question then. And can we expect better organic mushroom proportions further on? And why the sales price moved barely considering better organic sales proportions? Thank you.
Increase of organic mushroom sales is one of our priorities for the last couple of years, because really, we were saying this for ourselves, we were saying this for investors, that we see big potential there, and prices are much higher. So generally, we could be in much better position if we would be able to increase proportion of organic mushrooms in our sales. We were working to do this for the last 2-3 years, but for various reasons, we are not that successful in the level we would like to be. We have some projects where we see some positive signs. There is some increase in mushroom sales this year, but not on the level we would like to have. So it's still much work to be done. But we still believe that this is a really big and huge opportunity for us in the longer term to improve results of mushroom segment, and we are still working on that. Regarding prices, as I mentioned during the presentation, yes, we slightly increased proportion of organic mushrooms. But this is mathematical thing just to calculate average price, and there are different type of products, packed, unpacked, organic, conventional. So generally, though we had small increase in prices due to different mix at the end of the quarter, we have average price on the same level we had last year. But just different product mix is the main reason.
Thank you. So another question would be, have you recorded any demand so far for the new technologies, or when do you think you could be sharing the R&D products?
As already mentioned, we are not disclosing any news regarding R&D developments, and we will do so when we will have something to announce. But our main focus for today is really have working technologies in place, because I think this would be really a big change in the current situation, because we had several discussions already about those technologies, but there is one situation when you talk about ideas, and it would be a completely different situation when you could, go to one farm and show operating biogas production facility, tractor, feed processing plant, etc. in place, and you also have tests showing actual results in terms of production, in terms of financial results coming from those from usage of those technologies. So I would say for today, our main focus is really to complete the projects we are currently working, and then will be the next step, how to share that and how to benefit from that.
Thank you. In case of recession, do you think there would be a significantly lower demand for your products, being more expensive, or given the Ukraine situation, any market turmoil would be even more positive for you in terms of prices overall?
It's very difficult to comment on future prices for commodities. I would say that situation in Ukraine was not the only factor for increase of prices, because this increase has really started at the end of last year already. So where other factors which led to increase of prices, and situation in Ukraine, of course, had a huge effect on that, but it was not the only reason. So we believe that current price level is good for us. That's why we're also making contracts already. it will be very difficult to speculate how the situation could change. But as I said, we have current level, the level of contracts we could make for today. We are happy with this level, and that's why we are doing it right now. Regarding recession and the effect on our products, we'll see. Of course, I do agree that organic products are more expensive. So theoretically, in case of recession, of course, this part of business could be hit. But from our perspective, consumption of organic goods grows in double digits for the last, I don't know, 10 to 20 years every year in all the major markets. So there is a huge market, and we are quite small supplier in this market, and this trend of growth, it really continues. So I would expect that even in terms of recession, we would be maybe talking about slower growth of this trend. So the effect on prices due to that will be lower. But it's really, our just thoughts, but we will see.
Thank you very much for your comprehensive answer. We have a few more questions. So the next one would be as following. The attendee is saying, so as I understood from the previously said, the eventual target for M1 technology is to sell it to other manufacturers, as AUGA is not becoming a tractor manufacturer. Could you please comment on that?
Sorry for misleading, but no. Yes, from that perspective, that AUGA is not planning to become a tractor manufacturer. But as I said, what we want to be, we want to be the company which creates technologies and then shares those technologies. So we see our tractor as one piece of the overall solution, how agriculture could be done in the future. So we are not planning to produce tractors ourselves. We already showed in the announcement that we are signing agreements, and we will buy assembly services for the tractor. But this will be one of the products of our overall solution in sustainable farming. Hopefully this clears my previous answer.
Thank you very much. And what are your Q2 crop revenue expectations, considering and assuming low level of inventory?
I think the most important thing is that sales of crops, they really have very minor effect on our financial results. Because, and as I said in the very beginning of the presentation, if we talk about sales of crops, so result from those crops we are selling, it was already booked last year when we harvested them. And now it's only actual selling process. So generally we sell them at the same price they are in our books, and in theory result from our sales activities should be zero. Of course it changes time to time, but in theory it should be zero. So this when we talk about our changes in our sales, so it's not affecting our profitability, profit EBITDA in Q2. Of course, as our harvest last year was substantially lower, we will have the same situation we had in the first quarter, because Even if we look at historical figures, a majority of the harvest is always sold in the same financial year, and only smaller part is left for the first quarter next year, and the remainings of the harvest are sold in the second quarter next year. So this year we will have exactly the same situation. We have lower sales comparing to last year in Q1, and we will sell the remainings of last year harvest in Q2. So definitely, I'm not ready, sorry, to give specific figures, but obviously sales will be lower, in crop sales will be lower than last year. But once again, this will not affect our financial results in Q2 because this was already booked in last year's results.
Thank you for your answer. So as all the questions are answered on behalf of AUGA Group and Nasdaq Vilnius, thank you everyone for joining. It was our pleasure being with you today. The recording of the presentation will be available in the Nasdaq Baltic YouTube channel. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambrosas, for the presentation. Have a good day, everyone, and goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions, and hopefully we'll have a chance to meet you after 3 months.